Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the last Warrior Corner of the day. I'd like to introduce Brigadier General Jean LeBoeuf, Acting Commanding General for U.S. Army Africa.
Thank you, and thanks, and good afternoon, and again, welcome. Welcome to the last Warrior Corner. We're going to talk about U.S. Army Africa and the great things that we've been doing over the past year, and what's going to be happening here the next year as well, with a particular emphasis on this concept of set the theater, and I'll talk more about that in just a moment. But before we get going, I want to introduce two other speakers that are going to present for us as well today. And so to my immediate left is our Command Surgeon for U.S. Army Africa, and that's Colonel John Osborn. And then also to his left is our G357 U.S. Army Africa, and that's Colonel Mike Larson. And so they're going to be talking about different aspects of the command as well. And so as I said, U.S. Army Africa, it's an Army Service Component Command, of course, right? And it's a theater army for AFRICOM. And so our theater, our area of responsibility is the Africa theater, the continent itself, except for one country, and that's Egypt. And our primary purpose as a Army Service Component Command is to ensure strategic success across the continent within our theater of operation. And we do that through a couple of different ways. First of all, we do that through setting the conditions to ensure successful operations of our Army, joint, and multinational forces operating on the continent itself. Ensure we can have a projection of combat power at the time and place that's required. And the second aspect of our mission is what we refer to as a long game, and that is to advance, if you will, the capabilities of our African partner nations in terms of their capacity and, again, the capability for security and stability operations. And I'm going to drill down into details of that in just a little bit, of how all this that we're involved with contributes directly to strategic success on the continent. Before I get any further, let me go ahead and start a little video. And so you see, first of all, this thing called CTAF, and so that's a Southern European Task Force. And so you'll see that on Colonel Larson's left sleeve as well. And so that is U.S. Army Africa, and that's what we were previously designated as well as the Southern European Task Force. We still have that responsibility within the European theater as well, but we're also U.S. Army Africa. So roll the video, please.
So there's a wide variety of different reasons, urbanization, population, demographic, natural resources. There's things like pandemics, like we saw with Ebola, that could threaten the lives of thousands, if not millions of people. So there's a lot of reasons why Africa is important.
I think it's definitely enhanced the readiness. I think coming to a different environment, to a different terrain that we've never really dealt with before, has very much helped us in our readiness.
Oh, there's wonderful opportunities. Of course, every time we deploy soldiers with our foreign partners, there's opportunities for leader development there. But just the amount of vast and cultural experience alone, but the way that each one of the armies interact differently, and the amount of exposure. I've talked to soldiers that have had the opportunity to go deploy in Africa. They're just overwhelmed with the experience.
Keep going.
Great, thank you very much. Next slide, please. And if we can go to slide 2, actually. Let's go to the next slide. So we are operating on the African theater, all right? This is our continent. This is our area in which we conduct our missions, conduct training with our partner nations. This gives you just an idea of the scope of the size of the area that we're dealing with. It fits the continental United States, all of Europe, China, as well as India within it. 3.5 times the size of the continental United States. It's a very long distance from the west coast to the east coast, about 6,000 miles, and north to south, just a little bit over that as well. Just to give you an idea, to move around the continent takes a lot of time. Over 2,100 languages are spoken on the continent, and there are, again, all of the countries on the continent itself, including Madagascar, are part of our area of responsibility except for the country of Egypt. So it's very complex, though, as well. And the complexity itself lends to a number of different challenges and actually opportunities for us in operating on this continent. And that we got a long, if you will, not only distance to travel, but a number of different cultures that we're working with throughout the continent itself. And so you think of Africa perhaps as some homogeneous entity, and it's not at all. You think of the United States, east, west, north, south, there's differences, right? On culture and things of that nature. Same thing with respect to Africa, but multiply that times 3 or by 5. And those are the differences from east, west, north, and south. And so we divide Africa into regions to help us better understand how do we get at this absolute effort that we call strategic success. And then we'll go to the next slide, please. And so we have this concept that's charged actually for the service component commands and the theater armies to set the theater. And again, that's about setting the conditions for employment of our forces, but it's also other aspects of that as well. And typically when you think of set the theater, you think of, okay, that's opening and closing the joint operations area, right? You just go in and we'll open that up and we'll make sure that we can enable our forces and employ them. And then, of course, when the mission is complete, we'll close that joint operating area. Okay, well, that's a part of our mission. But Africa is, again, a very complex environment. It's an austere environment, and it's an immature theater. And that lends itself to additional opportunities for us, but it also lends itself to a need to actually divide this concept of set the theater into really 3 different pillars. And one is actually understanding the continent. I talked about the diversity on the continent itself. And so we take this regional approach to understand, okay, what are the differences among the different regions of Africa, and then what are, of course, differences even within individual countries. And so we do this through engagements with our partner nations. We also do this through our exercises, both medical exercises as well as our court series exercises, et cetera. And then we gather that information into a knowledge management system. It's a cloud-based system that's accessible by other DoD entities as well as Department of State, et cetera. And then we use this information, of course, to do additional planning for other contingency operations, et cetera. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel, but we have this knowledge base there. And so that is part of our challenge in setting the theater. Second part is shaping the environment in which we're operating in. And we do that really through two primary means. One is exercises, and I'll talk more about that in just a moment. And the second is a theater security cooperation activities. So all 3 pillars are absolutely necessary to be able to tackle this tough problem of setting the theater to ensure we can employ forces. So next slide, please. So what are we doing in Africa? And so this is, if you will, the initial or the center pillar of how we engage the different elements within Africa itself, whether it's through security cooperation activities, as I just mentioned before, to training. And so last year we trained over 7,000 soldiers from our partner nations just in fiscal year 2017. Of course, we have foreign military sales aspects. We also have operations, named operations that are going on within the continent itself. And then we also have these regular engagements, 42 different countries that we regularly engage with through our regional exercises as well as engaging through our regional leader seminars that are done in coordination with these regional exercises. And then we have the largest land force or largest gathering of senior military leaders on the continent of Africa each year takes place in our co-sponsored event, and that's African Land Forces Summit. Took place in Malawi last year and is going to be taking place in 2018 in the country of Nigeria. And so we're engaged in a number of different activities, and these are basically tactical activities. But when you're talking about strategic success, you have to accomplish these tactical activities throughout the year, if you will, and then they gather in terms of an overall implementation plan with long-term objectives to contribute to building towards strategic success. So I gave you a little picture in terms of the size of the continent itself. Now let me give you a little scope of how our engagements occur and what we're going to be doing in 2018. Next slide, please. So again, this is the different regions of Africa that I mentioned, north, south, east, and west, as well as central part of Africa. The next build, if you will. And so these are our exercises that take place, that we took place last year, but this is what's going to be happening in 2018. And so we have 4 regional exercises that are referred to as accord exercises that are actually joint exercises and multinational exercises as well, distributed throughout the continent. And these are exercises that mimic African Union as well as United Nations peacekeeping and security operations type activities, whether they're FTX activities or CPX type of activities, but you can see the level of engagement of our African partner nations, the flags on the right-hand side, and of course our international partners on the left-hand side. The colors in the yellow represent our medical readiness exercises, which Colonel Osborn is going to talk a little bit more about just a little bit as well. So we have 5 of those per year. 3 of those are actually aligned with our Accord Series exercises. Next build, please. And so these gray boxes represent the number of theater security cooperation activities that we are conducting on the continent. So you can see distribution throughout the different regions of Africa, of course. But you're going to see also here most of the events for fiscal year 18, and actually a preponderance of the events for last year as well, are focused on this western part of Africa and actually focused on this Lake Chad Basin area that some of you may have heard before. And I'll talk more about that in just a moment. But over 250 events scheduled for this next year. Very important for our overall engagement strategy. Next slide, please. So I talked about 2 different aspects of our mission to achieve strategic success. And one is making sure we can employ our forces, enabling that. And the second is making sure that we have our African partner nations have the capacity, have the capability to perform peacekeeping, stability, and security operations, and to build that capacity. And that's what we refer to as the long game component of this. It doesn't happen overnight. We do conduct training, we understand gaps that they have, conduct additional training, train the trainer, et cetera, but the ultimate objective is to be able to equip them not only with trained personnel, but also the equipment to ensure that they can conduct these operations on their own, and it's enduring ability for them to support themselves. But it's not going to happen overnight. And so the last slide mentioned all the different really tactical level activities that we're engaged with throughout the year. And those, again, build and contribute in coordination with our engagements with our African partner nations in the long game, if you will, towards that strategic success. And I mentioned Lake Chad Basin. This is an example of how we operationalize this concept of achieving strategic success. And so we have a particular focus area on this here in the last couple of years because of added instability. Lake Chad region itself, as you see, 1963 to 2013, has decreased in size by over 90%. 40 million people live in that area. And the 4 countries in Lake Chad Basin in Cameroon, Chad, Niger, and Nigeria. And so because of that loss of the size of the lake, it's directly impacting the livelihood of these 40 million people that live there, contributing to instability in the region. Second aspect of that is that we have growth of violent extremist organizations such as Boko Haram or ISIS West Africa or other illegally armed groups as well. And that lends to additional stability. And so there we've got really 2 contributing factors here to instability in this particular region itself. And so we have 7 million displaced personnel, whether they're displaced within the country itself or refugees across borders, and that's growing every single day. So it's a real concern for us in terms of ensuring that we put additional effort in this region to ensure success on the continent, not only tactically but strategically. And so what I'd like next to do is introduce Colonel Mike Larson, who's going to talk about strategic success and how we go about that, but from a perspective of our regional line force. And the regional line force included in 2017 the 101st Airborne Division. You saw that on the video coming from Fort Campbell over to the continent, and they've had extreme success throughout the continent. So with that, I'll turn it over to Colonel Larson.
Thank you, sir. So what I want to do is I'm going to talk a little bit more about how our security cooperation efforts impact operational readiness, and not just the readiness of our theater Army headquarters, but of the regionally allocated forces that we'll get for the FY. So if you could play the video, please. What I do have here is a video that's an example of where we demonstrated leveraged opportunities to ensure that we either maintained or increased the collective readiness of the maneuver elements within our regionally allocated force. So in this particular case, this is a maneuver live fire exercise at the company level from an element from 1st Brigade to the 101st BCT, commanded by Colonel LeBoeuf. That was part of our regionally allocated force from the last FY. And what this is an example of where we did leverage those opportunities. This is in South Africa, and I know our PAO is really excited about it because of the 360 aspect of what it allowed you to do on the monitor. But most importantly, when we started out with this campaign to incorporate the regional allocated force, we had to come up with a consolidated plan that got the most out of the regionally allocated forces, and at the same time maintain our Theater Army mission essential task. So that was the CG's intent. The CG's intent was don't disrupt their collective readiness, increase when possibilities exist, and maintain ours, our 5 medal task. So how did we do it? Bottom line is that we got their annual training path, laid that out with our annual order, looking out over the FY like a McCoo. We identified those opportunities where we could use our sources and timing synchronization with the country team where we could execute, in this case, maneuver live fire training. So in some cases, when the 101st completed their role as the regionally allocated force, there were some cases where they actually increased their operational readiness using the mock objective T model. And that might seem counterintuitive, but if you do the right thing, you manage expectations, and you can continually work it from the beginning in terms of how you're going to maintain and in some cases increase readiness, it is possible. So clearly there are some great opportunities in terms of being able to incorporate the regionally allocated force. First off, Africa is unique. What an incredibly unique operating environment. 53 countries that we work with as a Service Component Command, all with their own unique problem sets. And although we do have our lines of effort that do have focus that kind of allow us to focus regionally, in this case, when you're doing most of your security cooperation events, they are focused on a particular country. We do 4 exercises a year with med-readies that our surgeon's going to talk about as well. But opportunities, the opportunity to operate, in some cases, with a blank canvas, showing up and as a battalion or brigade commander, company level, battery, team commander to be able to come in and execute things you might not get to execute at Fort Campbell, Fort Drum, Fort Hood. So there's great, unique opportunities there. Cultural enlightenment for your soldiers, for your leaders. Every single one of those 53 countries has a very specific and unique identity that your team members will walk away with more enlightened, more culturally aware. Has a direct result on retention. Instead of doing the same old collective training on your home station, you're now getting an opportunity to execute it in a very diverse and interesting operating environment. As well, you are going to get stressed in terms of training challenges to deploy your combat power down to the continent, and that goes directly back to the CG's tyranny of distance slide. And it's going to truly, you're going to gain some mobility proficiencies as well. And lastly, it is an ideal environment for an SFAB. An ideal environment for an SFAB either validate its operational requirements, or in the future, as General Minnis talked about yesterday, when we have that regionally connection, that the outcome can be truly directly resulted to our long game in terms of achieving strategic success. Clearly, with opportunities, you're going to have challenges. Some of the challenges go directly back to that tyranny of distance. It's going to put some significant stressors on your communications and logistical enabling support requirements. And, that seems, intuitive, But when you consider the geographical challenges that Africa presents, not even including the cultural aspects, but it's definitely going to put some friction into your operation. Some of the other challenges that are going to be out there are going to be the non-typical pre-deployment type of training tasks, country clearance type of things. Getting visas is something that we typically take for granted. Every one of our African partner nations, that is their one opportunity to show their strength, that the fact that they are a sovereign power, and they are the ones that allow us to have access or not have access to their sovereign nation. So it's just one of those things that a command team doesn't typically intuitively think about. With that, I talked about the stressors of the tyranny of distance as well. That's something that's always going to be there. And if you can go to the next slide, please. Over there. Great. Nope. I'm sorry. Go back. I didn't know it was up. And then the last piece about emerging requirements as a friction point. Emerging requirements from not just the host nation of things that it could change. The political landscape could change. The relationship we have can change. Or the regionally allocated forces higher headquarters with different requirements that are valid coming down and causing friction. So two last things I kind of want to leave you with here, and that is taking us back to the broader purpose. Why do we do security cooperation? When you consider the population on the continent right now, 1.2 billion people, in about 30 years is going to be 2.4 billion people. That's 25% of the world's population. That's pretty impressive. And then when you consider that 41% of that population is 15 years and younger, there is an incredible youth bulge. And that is a long-term problem set or opportunity that we have the opportunity to influence in a positive way. Stability is your direct result of security cooperation. That's what we want. We want our African partners, we want to increase their defense capability so that they can achieve stability on their own terms. So with that, how did we get there? Working with our regionally allocated force, and that was through right up front expectation management and that continuous open lines of communication to make sure that we work through all those challenges and friction points that identified. So in the end, we found we had great success incorporating the regionally allocated force and moved one more metric along in terms of achieving operational strategic success. And I'm going to hand it over to our surgeon. He's going to talk about how we did some of our medical training in concert with our security cooperation that we call MedReadies.
Okay, good afternoon. What I'm going to go through is a little bit of a historical prelude up to the buildup of where we're going. People here, looking at the group, understand what a forward surgical team is. Afghanistan and Iraq, forward surgical teams were used in large scale, and then they started being split. When they got split, we went through lessons learned of 2 10-man teams, and they developed into forward resuscitative surgical teams. Okay, now I'm going to use some words that I'm going to use later. Of the forward resuscitative surgical teams, you have 2 groups split in 10. 6 of them are damage control surgery, 4 of them are damage control resuscitation. The soft teams, Special Operation Forces teams, have to be a small footprint by definition. Okay? You're bringing a surgeon forward or you're bringing a non-surgeon forward. It's a damage control surgery team or it's a damage control resuscitation team. Okay? There's many variations of the composition of the team. It's still being worked out to what fits what situation. Okay? The Surgeon General identified a problem because we didn't have enough people, didn't have enough teams. Okay? She built something that was referred to as Expeditionary Surgical Resuscitation Team. Okay? This is a 6 to 8 person team that has a specific medical equipment set, okay, that has been used down in Africa now a number of times. It is a model that's being used by other countries, or we are using a model that other countries have used. So it's a combined effort. With that said, the pictures that I have up here, the top right, bar over their faces, that's a special operations team. It's cute. It shows they're working with their backpacks. They're going forward with what they're able to carry on their backs. The vast majority of doctors don't know how to do that kind of thing. They know how to work in a hospital. Okay? In Afghanistan and Iraq, we took American hospitals forward. We built what the doctors could fall in on hard fixed facilities. Okay? We got a little lazy in that standpoint. We are not ready to fight tonight using that model, okay? What we're doing in Africa is helping to build towards that model. What you see down here, very minimal tools, okay? When I have a surgeon and I tell him, pack your bag of what you're going to take with you, orthopedic doctors are the best. They pack all kinds of great toys. And then I tell them to put it on your back and let's go for a walk. Then they come back, you'd be surprised how much stuff they take out, okay? You wouldn't be surprised. I want you to be able to go in the box. That means a surgeon needs to be able to stop the blood in the belly or in the chest. That's the box. A medic can stop it everywhere else with a tourniquet or with compression gauze. Okay? With that also, telemedicine. We had a good presentation here. It's going to be more important down in Africa because of the tyranny of distance and the people that you're interacting with. And we are exercising that. It's improving readiness for our providers and the people that we work with. Okay, I'd like to go to the next slide, please. Last year, we conducted 5 forward resuscitative surgical exercises, forward resuscitative care, global health engagements that brought us into a sovereign country where we were able to generate relationships through diplomacy, to get access, to work with that country, to get training. Number one, to get training for our teams. Okay. The teams came from active duty, they came from the reserve, they came from the National Guard. All they had to do was show up. They didn't bring any gear with them except personal protective gear. They worked with what the African countries had. So our people learned to use what they had. There was never enough electricity, there was never enough blood, there was never enough oxygen. In a real war setting, that is exactly what's going to happen because the speed of the fight, you're going to outpace your supply lines. You're going to hop. You're going to go forward. World War II was a great example of that in the Sicily campaign. We hopped forward and forward and forward, okay? We have gotten lazy to the standpoint in Afghanistan and Iraq that we fall in on fixed facilities. Our people, we have medevac rings where we can get to it, and logistics are getting all the supplies we need to them, okay? These lessons learned, if we want to fight tonight, the doctors need to learn how to go out and do that, okay? The team composition, which I'll get to, is I've got a cutter, a gas passer, somebody that can do damage control resuscitation, and supporting staff. In an austere, under-resourced location, it's typically 1 officer to 1 enlisted, okay, because they need the help, and I'm going to leave that blank. Last year, we were in Senegal, Ghana, Chad, Gabon, and Cameroon. Over 1,000 patients were seen, over 300 operations were done. The vast majority of them were done open. Now, from a surgical standpoint, I am training here, and I say I equivocally, the United States is training their general surgeons on how to do laparoscopic cases. When it comes time to open up the patient, for whatever reason, they don't have the experience. Here's another opportunity for us to do this. Here in the United States, it is a zero-risk environment. In Africa, it's a non-zero risk environment because you do not have all of the resources at hand. Okay? So again, it is mimicking what they may see in a fight. When you get attacked, you got to pick up whatever you can carry and you can go forward. You may not have taken all of your stuff. So you learn to pack light or pack efficiently or be ready. So this is a great exercise. Okay, next slide. To be straightforward and honest, I stole this slide from the Surgeon General's office, at least the first part of it. General West said, if we do not get this right, we won't get this right. Basically, she's saying we have to make sure that the training is there for our providers so that the medics forward can do their jobs. Because if the medics don't do their jobs, we won't get the patients back. What I'm throwing in is saying, from a forward surgical standpoint, from an austere location, under-resourced, dirty, tonight type of fight, if our surgical teams are not getting the muscle movement and the experience doing this, we're not going to get this right. Okay, damage control surgery in a forward location, an expeditionary mindset. We have to fight tonight. It's going to be uncomfortable, and it's going to be resource constrained. Okay, there's going to be questions of aeromedical evacuation. We will not have air superiority automatically. Okay, in Africa, the runways are mud strips that may get rained out. Okay, the tyranny of distance is like getting injured in Boston. The closest ER is in Miami or Seattle, and then the closest surgeon is back on the other side of the coast. And you're going back and forth, back and forth. The communication is a bandwidth issue. All of these techniques are great, except that if you don't have the bandwidth to continue the signal, that's a problem. And again, from an exercise standpoint, we're going to invite different platforms to come down to the theater with us for our guys to use and try it out. Hey, Samsi, can you hear me? And then we'll take them down to Senegal. Hey, Samsi or Launch Tool, can you hear me? And ask them questions and see how it goes. And provide lessons learned back to them. Okay? With that, I'll turn it back over to the boss.
Great, thanks, Doc. That was great. So just a couple of other points, and then I'll summarize real quick and open up for questions. So when I was at Shared Accord in South Africa with a regional line force as well as our South African partners out there conducting the exercises, live fire exercises, the breaches and things of that nature, and just as Colonel Larson said, the freedom of maneuver out in different parts of Africa, in this case, South Africa, was tremendous. They're doing things out there that they could not do back at home station at Fort Campbell. Just couldn't do it. Fire certain weapons, et cetera, conduct certain breaching operations. They could not do that. And so to a soldier that I spoke to, not to be careful as a general officer or somebody, they're just going to tell you the good news, right? But true, every single soldier I spoke to, though, said to the person, they said, this is the best training experience that they have experienced thus far in their career. Hands down. And it's just not because of that field training exercise. It's the whole exposure, of the culture of getting over there into theater and the challenges with that. And we talk about leader development. That's actually command priority number one for U.S. Army Africa, is leader development. Not just U.S. Army military leaders, but it's also civilian leaders, but it's Army African leaders as well, land force leaders. And so when you're operating in an immature theater, or an austere environment, something that our younger generation of soldiers may not have been exposed to yet. Folks like me, the gray hair, losing hair, et cetera, we've been there and done that. But we have a generation that have not been exposed to that necessarily. This is a prime training ground for them to be able to expose to conditions that they aren't used to. It isn't a developed theater. They have to think things through. And if you get something back at home station, you aren't going to be able to call it up and have it there the next day. That's not going to happen. You're going to go on without it. And so that requires agile, adaptive soldiers to be able to solve the problems at hand, because they aren't going to get help from anywhere else. And that's exactly what the future battlefield requires of our soldiers. Adaptive, agile soldiers to adapt to the changing environment, all right, that our enemy places upon us. A great training ground for us. So in summary, I talked about the conditions or the charge for us as a Army Service Component Command, set the conditions for strategic success. And that involves an ability for us to establish and continue to cultivate enduring relationships with our African partner nations, to develop their own capacity and capabilities, conduct security operations, and lend to stability on the continent itself. It also requires constant share of information that we learn on a daily basis there on the continent itself, that we gather, and be able to communicate that across the board through knowledge management centers, interagency interactions. And then third, it requires us to be able to really combine those two aspects, enduring relationships as well as that information, to be able to design activities, tactical activities, as part of an overall long-term plan of long-term objectives for each individual region and perhaps each individual country, working with our State Department and other government agencies, and of course our host nation in identifying their gaps, to be able to accomplish strategic success. And strategic success for us is strategic readiness for the United States Army and be able to project combat power at the time and place required of us. And that's U.S. Army Africa. So I'll now open it up for any questions that you may have. Any questions? Yes, sir, in the back. If you could just identify yourself and where you're from, if you don't mind, sir.
I used to work at the African Center for Strategic Studies in my former life, but as an ASCC commander, what keeps you up at night about this?
So, first and foremost is force protection, and that's one of our responsibilities. Of course, is oversight of force protection for all Army forces on the continent. On any given day, on average, we have 2,000 Army soldiers on the continent operating in different, whether they're named operations or theater security cooperation activities, training, etc. So that's first and foremost, is ensure that we have force protection out there. Then, of course, protecting our facilities, other U.S. assets, etc. So those are the things that keep us up at night, if you will, ensuring that that we have coverage in terms of safety for all of our personnel. Okay? Thank you, sir. Other questions, please.
Yes, I'm a retired reservist, National Guardsman, and I've recognized all so well that after 9/11, more of the reserve force has been called up to active duty. Has any of that ever made it down to Africa?
Yes, of course. In fact, we have a number of civil affairs teams that are there operating right there right now today. I'm an Army reservist actually called to active duty right now. So, and I've been on the continent. And so, yes, it's a total Army approach. So it's not just the Army Reserve active component, but also our National Guard as well. So the Army National Guard is state partnership programs. And those are tremendous assets for us in terms of developing these enduring relationships with individual countries. Extremely important. I'll give you an example of how important it is. You've heard of the Ebola crisis in Liberia in 2014, right? U.S. Army Africa played a significant role in the first response for that. Our ability to access that theater and be able to access that particular country to lend assistance, et cetera, was greatly facilitated by the state partnership program the state of Michigan has with the country of Liberia. And it was through that relationship that we were able to make those initial inroads, if you will, to help assist Liberia. Otherwise, there would have been other delays. And so the total Army approach is alive and well in Africa. In fact, we can't do our mission without the total Army. So great question. Thank you, sir. Other questions? Fun. A vast continent, a lot of complexity.
Brian Mays from Office of Chief of Public Affairs again. This is for the doctor. My brother was an Army doc. He just retired. What types of procedures, you talked about the different types of teams, et cetera, but what types of procedures do the teams do at various levels?
From talking about surgical procedures, standard, some hospitals, they were open appendectomies, open gallbladders, bowel obstructions. Down in Ghana, they were very active with trauma, with motor vehicle accidents, with moped accidents, head injuries. There were lung resections, there were abscess drainages, there were amputations. A lot of the things that the non-surgical folks were doing were dealing with wounds, which sounds kind of humdrum, but it's an extremely good thing to see there because the wounds are not 1 or 2 or 3 days out. They may be 5 to 10 weeks out, which kind of makes it exciting because you get to see the evolution of healing and you get to see that something that you did actually made it start to heal. So the medics, they did a lot of that. They got to see it. They saw what happens when you do this, this, and this. And they also see, well, when you don't deal with it, it gets really bad. Now, one thing I wanted to add, from a professional development standpoint, The providers, the nurses, the medics, hands down, were saying this was great. And from a retention and standpoint for the medical, they're extremely excited with this because it gives them professional satisfaction, because they don't feel like they're getting that, because we're not in a big fight right now in some people's minds that they have 50 casualties coming in at once. That's what makes surgeons happy, excited. Well, if you don't have that many injured, that means everybody's healthy. That's great. But to get medical training, you have to have the patients. Okay? So this helps tell the story from the PAO, and we can sit there and advertise that to the National Guard folks back at home. We send it to their newspapers. Hey, your guy did this, this, and this. To the reserve, to their home, they did this, this, and this. And it helps advertise to the public that the military is doing more with training and helping do good things. Thank you.
Okay, and with that, I understand, oh, is there one more question? All right, last question, and then I think we got to cut off.
Hi, sir. Kim Peoples from Maxim. I wondered if you could talk about your basing posture, and do we have it right? How you base the soldiers, your cooperation with partners, infrastructure, support for the force protection you just talked about?
I'm sorry, I couldn't catch the very first part of your question. Could you repeat?
If you could talk about your basing posture.
Sure. So we have cooperative security locations as well as contingency locations spread throughout the continent. Those serve a variety of purposes, but part of that is to assure access. And this is in agreement with the host nations in which these are located, if you will. And so it's always an agreement with respect to the host nation first and foremost. And so knowledge that we have these forces that are present. And so with that, of course, then we have associated with that, if we're going to have somebody in the theater itself, then we obviously have to have force protection measures in place. And then so we do a thorough risk assessment before they even depart to go to the theater itself, and that involves a number of significant steps, believe me. Okay, I see those on a regular basis. And involved in that as well in terms of routes into theater, routes of transportation while they're moving about the theater, if you will, and of course, what are emergency procedures should they run into a problem. And so all those are intertwined in terms of standard procedures before we even set foot on the continent itself, and then executed if necessary. And of course, we also track each individual there as well, okay, in terms of ensuring that there's a reporting requirement for all of our U.S. Army Africa personnel to be able to report back on a daily basis to our current operations center, and so we track that. And so we ensure that we have an ability to understand where they are and that we've got in touch with them on a daily basis. So, okay?
And sir, if I can just add on to that too. So I'm pretty certain that most of the group doesn't understand that the presence that U.S. Army has down there's 4 cooperative security locations in Dakar, Senegal, Gabon, Ghana, and Uganda. And then we have a contingency location in Cameroon as well. Those serve as opportunities for us to be able to project combat power or project U.S. forces, Army forces, to respond to crises that we couldn't predict. And one could argue that the fact that we have those, which is something we didn't have 4 years ago, is a great opportunity to respond to things like Benghazi. And we also have other elements that are postured to respond to security-related crises as well down on the continent. So as well, we're continuing to, our combatant command is looking at basing and basing requirements in East Africa, particularly in Somalia right now, and there's some planning efforts that are ongoing for that.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And so this concludes our Warrior Corner on U.S. Army Africa. Thank you all for attending, and we hope you enjoyed the presentation. Take care.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the 2017 Warriors Corner. Thank you for your attendance, and see you next year.